Hey everybody, it's Tuesday.
And welcome to this week's edition of Hook, Line, and Striker.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And thanks for being here with us tonight.
Yeah.
It is ice season officially. We've had some, I know we feel like we're in the middle of it now. Yeah. Well, we've just had these sub-zero temperatures coming through. And so, I know that we had ice forming before and we were talking about check the edges and still do all of those cool things because safety is always most important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, kind of across the ice belt, there has been sub-zero temperatures and, crazy wind and all of that. And I think in a lot of places, things are really locked up.
Yeah, well, even by us, you got to still go check the ice. I know one of our buddies, Mr. Bluegill, Troy Peterson, was out on Winnebago, and he was looking at all of the ice shoves. It looks like a crazy, hellscape of ice out there with big icebergs all over, and then there's cracks that with the cold weather have froze over. But he's talking you go and you drill on a crack and there's 7 inches, and then you drill literally right next to it and it'll be 20 some inches. So you really have to just be very careful in those types of situations and be very careful in those types of situations, and always be careful on normal ice. So, because no ice is ever safe.
Well, and that is a fabulous reference to make, because one of the other things that we think a lot about during ice season is the fun events and tournaments and things that go on. So when you are sitting here talking about Lake Winnebago, one of the things I heard is going on this weekend is kind of an event local to us, Party on Poigan. So, that Winnebago system, I know that a lot of times people go out there and it is a ton of fun and all of that. But, just keep in mind that, ice conditions vary from spot to spot.
Absolutely. Just want to start out by saying hi, Ray, Tobin, Jim, Kent, and Jay. Ray's going and saying that the Madison chains here in Wisconsin are frozen, so that's good to hear. I know that there's a lot of good ice fishing going on, and for us, we did a lot of media this last weekend.
Yeah, so Ice Junkies Outdoors had this fabulous panfish tournament that was going on this past weekend, and there was a lot of anglers, 40 teams, I want to say, that were able to enter into it, and some really fabulous pots of money for the winners. And it was truly an interesting weekend to watch fishing, because, like we're saying, those conditions across the lake were great, so anglers could get anywhere that they needed to be, but there were bags turned in all the way from literally 0 fish all the way up, over 6 pounds. So some really nice fish turned in those bags. And, the winners had some fabulous fish, and there was some other really great ones mixed in throughout all of the other contestants. And so we were able to, we were lucky enough to be able to watch that weigh in and kind of be part of that. And gosh, it was great.
Yeah, it was great, especially with some of the tough conditions. 6 pounds for 10 fish doesn't seem like a whole lot. There was people on the lake that were pre-fishing it saying that 10 pounds was going to have to be like the baseline, and fishing turned out to be tougher. And so, you really have to just play the day and keep your eye out on this tournament, because it's going to be an annual event. They're going to move it around. I don't know if they're going to move it around different states, but for sure northern Wisconsin. And it's a really cool tournament. They did a really good job at running it. Yeah.
Well, and I guess the only other thing I have to add is, as far as the fishing itself goes, it was really great that we were able to talk to most of the teams and the anglers. And it seems like, every single angler, a lot of the teams were downsizing to tungstens and things like that. But everybody was also moving over to waxies and spikes. I did hear one person say that the key to their success was keeping the waxies in their pocket with a hand warmer, because when you take them out, they were super wiggly. And, you never know. Maybe that is actually what does it. You put that little wax worm on there and it's wiggling around versus a dead piece of meat. Maybe that catches the eye of the panfish. I don't know. But either way, that was a trend across the board. So if you guys have been out fishing and you are catching fish, let us know what's working for you guys.
Yep. Just put it there in the comments. And if you have any questions for us, or you want to try and stump Tom, here's a good chance for you to do that. And without further ado,
let's bring him in.
We bring in Tom? How you doing, bud?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Wonderful.
Thanks for being here.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate you guys having me on the show.
Absolutely. Actually, I could not be more excited. We were able to meet you this past year at the different ice expos, and that was something really fun for us. To kind of talk fishing and all of that. So, I guess for people who have not been lucky enough to meet you yet, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I live in Nebraska, just west of Omaha. Um, Grew up fishing anywhere from here in home in Omaha area all the way up to Bemidji, Minnesota. My folks owned a cabin up there for 30, I think it was like 37, 38 years. So I've got a pretty good experience on fishing the water from Bemidji all the way down to home. So there's not too many bodies of water that I probably haven't fished at least once. There's quite a few I'd love to fish again repeatedly, but overall, it's one of those things. The outdoors and the fishing is just, as well as you guys know, with talking to you, is a huge part of my life and my family's life. So,
And so then as far as being in the outdoors, do you just take part in the outdoors? Do you guide, or what does that look like for you?
yeah, so I own TomTom's guide service here, and I'm living in Utah, Nebraska, and we do trips for ice fishing, open water. We do some waterfowl hunts. We're always looking to expand to probably someday we'd like to do some big game hunts, and we do trips for the person. We cater also towards corporates, which is kind of not the norm. I just got back from Okoboji with a group from Boys Town. So, and I'm getting ready to go back up at Okoboji with a group from Ferguson Plumbing. So we do a little bit of everything, whether you're just starting out or if you've the experienced fishermen and kind of want to do something different. We just kind of cater to whatever the needs are for that client.
And do you have a specific species that you target, or that's then based on client, or what does that look like?
So if they're local, so around here, around the Omaha metro area, we're mainly panfish. I'll do target some walleye in the early spring, late fall. And we do have some lakes that are within probably an hour, I'd say an hour and a half radius of Omaha metro area. They got some very good walleye population to them. But overall, it's mostly panfish. Surprisingly, we have some really big crappies and bluegills. I know when I see some pictures from other places, at times I'm like, well, that's not that big. We catch 10-inch bluegill all the time, and people are like, you what? And I'm like, yeah, that's not that big of a deal. And so, and then there's other times, we'll get a lot of catfish through the ice is kind of one thing that I say is a unique deal. If nobody's ever done it. It'll definitely make your blood pump when you're sitting there jigging a 3 to 4 mil Thompson jig and you see big mark coming up. And you're like, oh, I bet you it's a crappie. And you set the hook and you're like, wait a minute, that is not going anywhere. And then all of a sudden it takes off. And you're like, oh, this is a little bit bigger. So I like tackle. Awesome. It's fun.
So I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask you more about catfishing. That is for sure, because I happen to love catfish. And I don't think we talk about, ice fishing and catfish almost ever on the show. But we were able to put the link to your guide service in the comments. So whether you're watching us from Facebook or YouTube or whatever that looks like for you, that's something that you'll be able to click on. And while I'm looking at the comments, I'm seeing that Jeff is asking here, he's heading to Gull Lake, Minnesota this weekend. Any tips for a first timer?
One of the key things that I like to point out is, I had to laugh. You talked about keeping the bait warm. So I use primarily spikes. Spikes are my favorite for if I'm going to put what they call meat on the hook. I use spikes. It doesn't matter if it's here at home, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, it doesn't matter. My biggest key I tell people is when you're wearing your bibs and you got your hoodie on underneath, put those in your hoodie pocket so it's next to your body so they're warm. And then when you take a spike, hook them by the narrow end onto the hook. And so that way the fat end hangs off and they will wiggle. When you drop that jig down, you'll see that tail end just sits there and just twitches with just holding it dead stick. And a lot of times that'll get those bluegill or even perch that are real finicky. They can't avoid it. I mean, they just have to eat that. So that was the biggest. And then I'd say use your camera, whatever brand it may be, punch a hole, find those weed beds. This time of year, we all know that those weed lines start to slowly die off and fall. The key right this time of year is those weed lines. If you can find a weed line, get up on it, try being in the weeds or outside of the weeds. But if you find some weed line, your Gull Lake, and just remember there's different limits for panfish in Minnesota depending on the lake. And I believe Gull Lake, it's been a few years since I've been up there, but I think it's 5 per person is all you can have on Gull Lake. So make sure, that's another thing that, some people forget when you start traveling. Got to make sure read them regs, because they will get you every time if you don't.
That is a really great point. As far as the fishing with the spikes, did you say red or white?
I like red. Red seems to be I've had the best luck with red. There's been some times where I'll find the white ones work for crappie if the crappie are really being finicky, but I think it's the bloodworms and the different microscopic bugs that are in the lakes when they come out of those bottoms. Primarily, I think they got a reddish tinge is what I find most times, not in all lakes, but in a lot of lakes. So that's why I run red spikes, like I said, from here all the way up north. And there's been a few occasions where they wouldn't eat the red spike. They wanted a waxy or artificial, but 9 times out of 10, that red spike is key.
Well, I have found this year, Josh and I are plastics users, and that's cool and all, but this year we've really found just fish have been really erring towards that live bait. So I've been using more spikes and waxes than normal. But I'm also kind of laughing hearing you talk about finding the weed edges, because, that's something that we talk about, honestly, a lot in this show. And it's not that it's not new information, but it's funny how it relates to us. So we went out fishing a few weekends, maybe a weekend ago or whatever. We had this lake. We were certain we knew where these fish were. It's, got a pretty deep basin, and right off of one of those edges, there's like a huge line of tree drops, anywhere from like 10 to 30 feet. I'm told 30 trees are in there. I don't know how many. It's a ton. And I'm like, all summer, like marking trees, looking at that. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I'm going to be able to like ice camp over one of these trees. And we went there this past, recently. And the only thing in these trees are like little dink fish. And we were like convinced maybe they're coming in the evening. We stayed a pretty long day and all of that. But I think, that reminder of looking for those green weeds. And this is a great time of the year to be doing that, because like you're saying, those weeds are going to be dying off. And then one of the things that drives those fish is finding those oxygen rich areas.
Yeah. And, so just last week I was up at Okoboji, and I won't give away one of my spots, but it's not a spot that, there isn't people around fishing. But the key was for us to stay in the keeper size panfish was literally in this big bay in this basin. There was a 6-foot area that had some weed still. And it was just unreal that like you got outside of that area too much, like 4 feet away, and it was 4-inch gills all day long. And you would think they would want to hide more, but no, it was the bigger sunnies and bluegills and crappie that were in there. And it was just kind of weird that, most of the time you think of crappie that are going to suspend, in 25, 30 foot of water, but they were, for some reason, it must've been a bug hatch. I never did figure it out because the water clarity wasn't the best with the camera, but it was enough that when I punched the hole and dropped the camera down, when it first started going down, I'm like, wait a minute, that's why it's really dark, because I just dropped it right in a patch of weeds. I'm like, okay, sweet. So I went 6 foot off to the side, and then I drop it down. I'm like, where'd the weeds go? Like, I was just in weeds. And I turned the camera. I'm like, wow, this is not a very big patch of weeds. And we caught pike, bat. I mean, and we seen walleye come through in the camera. I mean, it was unreal to see how much all the fish use that weed pocket throughout the day. And it just kind of reaffirmed that whole thing and you're right. We do all talk about it all the time, weed line, structure, break lines, no matter what body of water, those things never change. It's just kind of unreal that you can go from Nebraska to northern Minnesota into Canada, they're all the same. The only difference that I always tell people is here at home, I can't hardly use a camera. Our water's so murky that most times I drop a camera down, it's like, I see 2 inches in front. So it doesn't do me a lot of good, but it's still a really good tool that I think a lot of people don't use as much. I think they kind of rely on their flasher so much instead of the cameras, because it's, especially nowadays. I mean, look how many companies make them where they fit in your pocket. It's my Apex suit. My front pocket is my camera.
Yeah.
And no matter what I'm doing, it's in there and it's ready to go. And if okay, what's going on? I drop it down the hole and look and go, oh, okay. So
we're laughing because Keith McCormick is here asking if Nebraska even gets ice.
Imagine that. He says that is because to him, unless you have 10 inches ice, there's no ice. They're all spoiled to where they can put hard shacks and drive out. And around me, we can't drive machines. It's all hand pull.
Yeah.
So you learn that a Smitty sled is your best friend.
Well, and hey, I'll take Keith's participation where I can, because otherwise I can't get him on this show. Kidding, man. It's okay. Man, we have all kinds of questions here. Oh, actually, Ray is asking a really great question before we move on, because I know, Ray, you're interested in talking catfish too, and me too, so we have not forgotten. But before we get there, Ray is asking another question all the way at the bottom here. He's saying, if you cannot see, like if your camera, you're only seeing these really short distances, he says fish have to use their nose. Do you use scent then in those conditions where it's poor quality to see?
I think it's more, I find on some of the lakes that we really get into the catfish, it's sound. So like a Northland tackle buckshot spoon, or a little Z Viber, with some spikes on it. If I am really truly just trying to chase cats, and I don't do it as much as what most people do around here. There's some guys that do a lot. They'll get, so we can take a perch or bluegill and actually cut them for bait here. So guys will take and put like a 1-inch chunk of crappie or bluegill on the treble hook of a flutter spoon or something. So there is some scent involved in that, but I also feel like the rattle baits is the key, because we all know, and like you get up in some of these sloughs up north, the water can be really stained, and I think all fish are the same. That rattle travels, I think, a lot further than smell does, because we've even had sometimes in some of these lakes that we don't get the snow cover. So a lot of guys, you're wearing your cleats, and I've seen it where we've sat and had fish come in and somebody comes walking on the ice and they're 50 yards away and you can see all the fish just scatter off the screen. And so I think that sound is something that's not looked at as much as what people think. And especially you can hear if you pay attention, it's real quiet out. You can hear when somebody's using a spud bar. I mean, you hear it a mile away. It's like, okay, if we can hear it, what is that doing underneath? But yet there's other days when the ice is cracking and popping, it doesn't bother them. So I think I think there's just a lot of factors that we get humbled. Like you guys were saying, you went to a lake, you got all this structure here, all this is going to be the deal. That's one of the things that I think I still enjoy so much about the fishing aspect is I've had it where I've narrowed it down and I've got a pattern and it's working, and I'm on day 5, and it's like the same lake and it's producing, and I'm going over and over and over. And all of a sudden day 6, I go and the same vicinity, nothing. And I just kind of go that almost look of death of, uh-oh. So then you go back to square one again, so it's, no matter what all of us say, no matter what any pro ever says, it's still fishing. At the end of the day, you better at least enjoy being in the outdoors, because there's days that's all you're going to get.
Well, and Jay is making an interesting point. Sometimes he says noise can spook the fish. So how do you know what days to pull out, a rattle and spoon or something like that?
So I go with the rule of thumb is start small and start very subtle. And if you're bouncing a rattle and there's nothing, usually you'll get at least a little fish to come in. But if you notice we get a big mark come in, and we all do it where we get, we're looking at our phone and all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a fish. And you start bouncing it right away. And the more you do it, the slower they fade back off. It's like, okay, what didn't they like? That's my first key, that it may be a noise deal where they're not wanting that rattle, that buckshot or whatever it may be. And believe it or not, we've caught on some days more catfish with a 4mm tungsten jig loaded with spikes than we did with a piece of cut bait. And they come in, and the thing that we found a lot of times is on a couple of lakes where we could see is the catfish would come up so fast to that tungsten jig, they'd miss it and their tail would whip and hit the bait. And you were thinking you were missing it. So you're setting the hook, but they never had a hold of it. Well, you were jerking that bait out of the strike zone. So it's almost like you had to really hold that rod and just wait for the tug. If you didn't feel a tug, you don't move. And for a lot of people, that nick, we all get that where you just feel that nick and you set the hook. No, you really need to wait for just that feel. And when they hit it, you'll know it, because it's almost like a very aggressive pike. When they finally grab a hold, it's not a subtle, like, oh, I think that was, but I'm not so certain. Most of the time, you're using light tackle, you'll know, because the rod, especially with me, I run so many panhandlers, but that bite indicator on the end, sometimes it works out better that way. Me personally, I run the 35 a lot. And so it's got that tapered spring, and it's almost like our snare rod. I can just kind of watch it. And when it bends and it's almost down about an inch or two, then I set the hook. It's like, I got you now. I know what you're doing. So
that's so interesting. It's funny that you're talking about the panhandler rods, because as you're talking about this, I almost wondered if this was then an application. Like, I saw your hat has the JT logo, and I was thinking actually they're snare rods, because that's a really great point. Like, a fish is coming by, and if though sometimes even just if they zoom by it fast enough, like the resistance of the water can. I mean, our rods are so sensitive these days. That little spring bobber might bob around. Some days that's as much as you get to see as a bite, So sometimes people are even setting the hooks then. But like you're saying, if you can leave that down there until you get that sure bite, gosh, that makes me think of those set rods all day.
Yep. And there was a lake north of here that my son and I, Jacob, we actually, instead of putting them in the rod holders for the snare rods, we were holding them like a dead stick. And it was on a 4mm tungsten with just spikes on it. And they were coming up, and if they felt any resistance, they were letting go. But that snare rod, once it load up, you just, of course, if you haven't experienced a snare rod, it's not a set in the hook. It's you let it load up, and then you just start reeling, it's kind of a fun thing to see, because you're like, oh, okay. And then when it's fully loaded up, you start reeling. And then as soon as it clicks off that feeder, you'll hear it click when you turn those bait feeder reels. And as soon as you get that first turn, all of a sudden that it gets into that backbone, you're like, yep, we're on. So it's come in handy. There isn't a lot of times that I've used it without live bait, but that's one of the few applications that has stuck out in my head quite a bit, is using for them catfish on 3 and 4mm tungsten jigs. So
that's actually awesome.
Yeah.
So a little bit different topic, but Tanner's asking if you have any tips to avoid line twist.
So on a spinning rod, I'm not going to take credit for this. It's a friend of mine, Chad Lorth, actually told me a trick, and it works very well. Is if you go to the fly fishing department, they have a leather patch. It almost looks like it's like a 50-cent round piece of leather patch on each side, and you pinch the string in between the leather patch and pull that through the line, or pull it over the line, and it helps take the twist, the memory out of the line. Now, granted, you're not going to do the whole spool, but if you're like fishing 10, 15 foot of water and it's continuous to get a spin, just do that to like the first 10 feet of it, and it works. And then the other key thing to remember is, when you hook into a fish on an open face and use the spinning reels and you're turning, the drag is going, stop turning the handle, because that's what puts the most. I see that a lot on guide trips. People are not used to it. And, you hear the line going out, but they're still turning the handle as fast as they can. That puts the most amount of twist in a line. I run a lot of free fall, whether it be, 13 fishing or whoever it is, I use a lot of inline just for that reason, is because when you're fishing that smaller diameter, it seems like on a spinning reel, it still gets a lot of twist to it, and the inlines do not. But, and another thing to think of is when you put your line on whatever reel, put the line in warm water before you put it on the spool, because it helps relax the memory. So it's not the same memory as it was on the spool that it came from. It takes the memory on the spool you put it on.
I think I might have seen that hack once or twice on Facebook. So when you put it in that water, you said hot water, and like for how long?
I do it for at least like a minute. I don't think it has to be very long. I have seen that where I can tell the difference from the time that I've done it without and the time that I've done it with. I've seen a difference. Some people say it doesn't make a difference. I think it does. And if it doesn't, what does it hurt? It's another minute of your time put in some warm water. So if it's just coincidence, then that's what it is. But if it's working, then I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Well, and there's quite a few comments coming in that seem to be agreeing with you. So it sounds like your method is fairly on par with what most people are doing. A few alternate methods there that people at home can definitely check out in that comment section. So that's pretty awesome. And then what do? We usually just use little swivels.
Yeah, so Jay kind of brought it up down here. He said he uses a 3-foot fluoro leader with a size 10 VMC swivel. So for us, one of my things is that I'm as big as my hands are and as hard as it is. I'm an ultralight guy. Like I really like the small tackle, and I found a company called Hytena, and they make a number 28 swivel for fly fishing, and it's a 20-pound crane swivel, and I put that on all my rods, and I just, instead of using, in some applications I'll use a fluorocarbon leader, but most of the time with using 3-pound test line, I can just take a section of whatever main line and tie in that number 28 swivel, and then just when my leader runs out, I just cut off 3 feet above the swivel, flip the swivel around, and then I got my leader again. And that doesn't affect jigging because that is such a small swivel. Like you're supposed to be able to use it on fly line, right? So you're using it with dry flies and stuff like that. So check that out. Those are the number 28 Hytena swivels is kind of what we use. So.
And Jay is asking if you can share that swivel. We can probably look that up and put the comments up.
Yeah.
Cool. So, Tom, what do you have coming up next with your ice season?
Well, right now we have a dreaded warm up, which for us ice fishing anglers, men and women and kids, we do not like, especially as a guide. When I hear 50-degree weather coming, it tends to make me a little nervous. I am seeing some cooler temperatures at night, but it still makes it number one thing for me, and it always will be, is safety. When we get a lot of warm ups, and this year we don't have any snow at all. So we have glare ice, and when you get those warmer days, you get a little water on the top, and you can get a pooling spot. And next thing you know, it creates a hole. Next day you go back, and it could have been 5 inches ice. Now it's an inch ice. So these warmer temperatures here in the Midwest, down by me, because in case Curtis is still here, he would say he's in the Midwest and has plenty of ice and doesn't have that problem. But here, I'm always checking ice. And we've had a couple lakes that we usually guide on, and we can't even get on because the whole middle is open because the geese keep it open because we haven't had a cold enough weather to lock it up. So it's, as the season goes, typically we have a month and a half. Sometimes we've had 2 weeks ice. Our ice season can change in such a hurry. So it always makes you kind of, when we have ice, it's go, 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 go. And you try to go as much as you can because you just never know when the ice is going to fade away. So it's never good because when the ice goes away here, that means I'm traveling more north. So
You're traveling more north.
yep.
Well, that is interesting though, because that little bit of melt and how it can affect those ice conditions so much, like you're talking about. But that affects the fish and the fishing as well. And it almost is kind of crazy because when they feel that water melting, they start to think spring. And I mean, gosh, at this point, it's still only January.
Yeah, and it's you get where you get a lot of water running off the top down through a hole. It confuses the fish because they got warmer water inflow. And a lot of our lakes are man-made, so we get a rain or we get snow melt, a lot of these fields are tiled and we have water that's running off into the creek that feeds it, so you have warmer water coming in than what has been. It can really make it a very volatile up and down roller coaster for the fish. And that's why I get a lot of people when they book with me, like 2 weeks out, what lake? I don't know yet. And then they're like, well, what lake do you think it would be? And I said, I don't know. First thing is safety. I got to check the different lakes and see which one's the safest. Second of all is which one's going to have the most consistent bite that I think that for this, what you want to go for the day, and then after that, it's like, okay, if all those things are met, then I'll let you know what lake it is. I always tell people the night before I will send you a pin of the lake we're going to, because our weather is not stable enough for me to go, oh, 2 weeks from now I'm fishing Wildwood, or Wanahoo. And a lot of people that don't know this area still know Lake Wanahoo because it's an internet sensation joke of a lake in Nebraska, because everybody goes, oh, we caught it on Wanahoo, because it has produced some fish and it's very well high pressured. And it goes right now, it's in a weird cycle to where when I say weird cycle, it probably has more 6 to 7 inch crappie than there probably is in the state of Minnesota in one lake. It is unbelievable the amount of crappie, just 6 to 7 inches. Like, we're not talking maybe 50 or 60,000. We're talking 500 to 600,000, and that range is just gobs of them. You can't. It's almost like they condensed it in an aquarium and you drop a bait down it. They just swarm at it. It's just unreal.
That's really interesting. There was a lake just north of us a few years ago that the DNR was urging people to come far and wide to this lake. And it was like, take as many crappies as you can for something, very similar as to what you're describing. So I'm not saying that anybody's saying to do that there, but in our experience when that happened, it was amazing to go and fish there because the number of, like you're saying, 6, 7, 8 inch bluegill or crappies was astounding. Like, you hear stories of people, oh, I could barely get my jig in my hole before they started biting. And like literally these fish were like waiting at the holes for the jigs to come down. And when you caught these fish, they were like the skinniest little, like you could almost see through them. And what happened though is then they were able to take some of those fish out of there, and I think that the fishery has improved quite significantly. And even the number of species that we've been able to catch has really been a whole lot of fun. So, it's kind of cool to find out about those lakes when they're in that part of the cycle, because gosh, you got to let a few years go by. But once that happens, and then this is actually my favorite part, because people's like verbiage on the lake never changes. Oh, it's garbage. Oh, the fish are small. Oh, this, oh, that. And then it's like, oh yeah, you're right. Oh yeah, they are still really small. Yeah, it might not be worth your, I'm not trying to steer people wrong, but if their impression never changes and I have a few, year or two of really great fishing, I'm going to go for it.
Yeah. Well, and that's 2 years ago, the same lake, we caught multiple 16, 17 inch crappie out of it. And in fact, I'll never forget, my boy Jacob sat at one hole and pulled 4 in a row out, and I caught 2 that were maybe 9 inches. And he's like, Dad, look, and holds it up. I'm like, again, and he just laughed, dropping down. I thought, well, maybe he's gonna. Nope, he never moved off the hole. Like, I sat where I was, and he kept pulling them out. But it was just like that year, it seemed like we could do no wrong, and now this is the 3rd year after that, and it's just a cycle of lake. And yeah, it's got some pressure that I think kind of magnified the fact that it's on a cycle, but that's one thing with any body of water. You know, they all cycle. You know, all these lakes have a cycle. And you're right. You know, when I hear somebody say, "Oh, you know, that lake's done. It was overfished. It's dink fest." You know, that's the most overused word there is it's dink fest. You know, don't go there. It's dink fest. You know, and I always tell myself, okay, I hope everybody else forgets about it, because in 4 years, I want to go back to that lake and then see where the dinks are then. So it's one of those ones that you kind of put in the back of your head, like, I'm going to remember that one, because in a couple years, I'm going to go back and we're going to see where they're at.
Actually, the other thing that I love hearing about what you're saying right now is, you are referencing these different cycles and stuff that lakes go through. And, we can't blanket statement and say that they're all the same, because they are all different. And especially like you're mentioning, with the different pressure that lakes do or don't get from anglers. But I think that there are so many people out there that when they start to see a cycle change, they panic or they look to place blame or point fingers and all of that. So, I mean, honestly, one of the things I just appreciate is just hearing kind of your approach at that. It's not about having one lake to always fish. It's about, like you're saying with your clients, checking different spots, checking the ice, checking the conditions, checking the fish. There's so much more that goes into fishing than just like plopping down on a lake that you pointed to on a map.
Yeah. And, I don't have the luxury of being up north, and not all guides, but a lot of guides live on the lake. That's their home lake. They literally drive out of their garage and go 50 feet down the road and go onto the ice, and it's their lake, and there's sometimes I think they have a real advantage at times, but then others times I think to the fact that I have a handful, probably 7 to 8 lakes that we usually rotate and fish pretty good, which at times makes it a little bit more difficult because it's more bodies of water, but they're not huge lakes. But it's also kind of nice when one lake has got a lot of pressure on it. I'm not stuck to that lake, I just load up my stuff and go to a different lake and check that one, and there is some advantages, I think, of being mobile. And that's where, I know I kind of mentioned something earlier about keeping my camera in my Apex suit. And then that suit has really, it's really kind of changed for me, being able to stay out of a shelter longer. And, I'm not a little guy, and it used to be the Predator, the knees in it didn't have enough padding, and kneeling would I just couldn't do it. And, one of my older daughters say it's because I'm getting old. Yeah. Ha. But, it does make a difference kneeling down on that snow or ice to have a little bit more padding. And that Apex, those bibs, I love the padding in it. And I find myself more and more, just like when I'm scouting, or if I'm going to scout for a client coming up, it's just grab the little jet sled and throw 2 poles, a little tackle box in a couple pockets, a camera, and off I go across the lake instead of taking a hut, So, and that's also, one of the other things that defaults back to the safety. I know when we worked the show at Ice Fest, we had a lot of people that were, one of the main things, we always heard from people is, well, what's the difference between yours and the competitors? Well, the only thing I tell everybody is, I don't care whose you buy. When it comes to ice safety, I just want you to wear a flotation suit or wear a life jacket. So either wear a life jacket with your Carhartts, that's fine if that's what you want to do, but the biggest key is safety, and I see that more, not so much when you go further north. You go further north, everybody has a Strike Master, a Clam, or what, you see them all over. Down here by me, we see a lot of people still walking across the ice with just Carhartt jacket and bibs, no life jacket. And I always cringe, because, that Carhartt material, you go through the ice, it's a sponge. You're not going to like how that's going to work out for you, because, and that's where I always, when somebody goes, well, we're just going to go, how's the ice thickness? Well, I haven't been to this lake. Well, we're just going to go check it. Okay, well, wear a life jacket. If you don't have a float suit, my son, before we bought him a striker suit, he wore a life jacket, ice fishing. like, and I think some people forget, they're like, oh, I don't want to spend the money. Okay, well, you own a life jacket anyway. Most time, if you're ice fishing, you fish open water, just take the life jacket. Just put your arms through and just don't have to zip or buckle it. Just at least have it on, at least to have a piece of safety, and I think that's, when you were talking about more and more people say about Dink Fest or whatever, the other thing that we forget is with COVID, look how many more sportsmen we have in the outdoors, period. Whether it be ice fishing, hunting, etc. And I think that's where we are, the experienced people in the outdoors, need to take more time, and just when you see somebody doing something, just strike up conversation, try to educate a little bit, whether that'll be on technique. For instance, there was 2 guys on a lake that first time ever ice fishing, and they were trying to hand drill, with a Moen ice auger, just cranking away. And I walked over and I go, "You want some holes punched?" And they're like, "Yeah," So I punched about 10 holes for them, and they had, it looked like they took their spinning reels off of their walleye rod,
Okay.
and put it on an ice fishing rod with 8-pound test.
Yeah.
And the guy tied a snap swivel, and I don't remember what size it was, but it was almost the same size as the ice fishing jig.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, "Hey, just kind of," so the next question was, "You guys been out much?" "Oh, it's our first time ever today." Okay. So then, "Hey, if I were you, I would go to lighter line," and they kind of look at you. So I went and got one of my rods and showed them, I'm running 2-pound test, and they just, 2-pound, really? It's like, yeah, for panfish, we run a lot of 2-pound tests, and then you don't use a snap swivel, no, direct tie it on, so that way, and then show them that, with the jig, you can pull that knot so the jig hangs vertical or horizontal, and that makes a difference, so I think that's one of the key things that I think a lot of people need to think about right now, is just the camaraderie of meeting new people is an enjoyment as in itself. But also, a lot of these people just don't know. I mean, they watch a lot of YouTube videos or everything else, but a lot of those, they're just watching them catch fish. They don't understand that, oh, you don't use a standard snap swivel for, and it's, so that's where it comes to play, where, I always tell people I love sharing what I know. And I love learning from other people, and there's still, like, the leather patch thing was from Chad. I've been around fishing all my life and never heard that. And when he said that, I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "You buy that, sure enough, go in the fly fishing department, and there's that leather patch piece." And I'm like, "Okay, so maybe it's not so crazy." He used it once. I'm like, "Well, that's easy." So now I pass that on, and there's just other things that I think at times some people get a little, where they think it should be their own secret, and it's like, no, because if you don't tell them and you don't tell other people, eventually nobody's ever going to know it, and you got to let somebody else to do it, so yeah. And like I just seen Jay said, take the time to educate other people. I think we owe it to the outdoors, and we owe it to everybody else as being, what I consider a sportsman. You're supposed to be courteous. You're supposed to help. You're at the boat ramp and you see an older guy trying to load his ice shack. Oh, and I know we'd all like to sit there and laugh, because I know people's done it to me, because I probably look like the biggest, clumsiest person in the world trying to figure out how to pick up an ice shack and manhandle it in the back of a pickup by myself. And I guarantee everybody's like, "Is he going to fall? Is he going to trip?" But sometimes we just got to just put our phones away. Don't try to do a Snapchat to your buddy to show him how funny this looks. Instead, run over there and help them. Because someday, that all pays out in the end. And at the least, we want everybody else to experience and enjoy it too. So,
yeah.
Plus, nobody's going to give you a hard time if you really only give away 80 or 90% of the information. Set those guys up with the right line and the right jigs and give them the bait, but don't tell them that the weed pile is only 2 feet across.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
That is funny.
So you did mention your Apex suit, and the only other thing I do have to ask about that, because we talked about all the striker gear floats, and that's awesome. And you talked about the Apex being warm. But the other thing that they say it has going for it is the mobility. So is it true? Is that suit more mobile than other options you've worn?
Yes. So I had the Predator, the Climate, and now the Apex. It is so much lighter. It's not as bulky. That was one of the things that at times I really didn't like about the Climate. Like, yeah, it was extremely warm and it had the liners in it, but if you went from in the shack to outside, and I say that not all people would feel that way, but when I'm trying to unload and load stuff for a big group, a lot of times I've had clients look at me. I'm in my bibs and a hoodie and a ball cap, and there's just steam rolling off me, and they're looking at me like, "What is wrong with this guy?" Well, I've made like 9 trips to the back of the pickup, carrying gear to the side by side or to the sled or wherever I'm at, and that Climate suit just seemed like it was so bulky and it held. The Apex, I've noticed my pants are not as damp, even if I'm really active. It really doesn't seem like it holds the heat, but it almost seems like it helps the moisture dissipate more. And I know if my wife she probably said she's watching, when she hears this, she's going to shake her head. I'm notorious for wearing my long johns and a pair of sport shorts underneath. That's it. And I don't drive to these locations with my bibs on. So I got a pair of slippers, my long johns, my sports shorts, and a hoodie on.
You don't drive with the clients then, huh?
Yeah. So then when I get there, I put on my bibs because I don't want to be sweating too much before I get there. But I always laugh because I had somebody go, "Why don't you wear more?" Like, I'm like, because you don't want to wear too much. Like this suit is unbelievably warm. It is, and I remember reading about it and I'm like, yeah, okay. I got the Climate. Like, it can't be much better than the Climate. And it truly, I was just like, wow, this is way lighter. It's not as bulky. It's warmer. And it is, there's not enough great things I can say about it. It's one of those, it needs to be washed, and I don't want to wash it because I'm like, what happens if I need it the next day? I don't want to use my Predator or whatever. So it's like, I almost feel like I need to buy another one so I have 2 of them so I could rotate them out because
rotate them out. I get 2 different colors, so you know which is which.
And that's one thing I'm like, they need to come out with more colors because I love it so much to be like, okay, give us some different options here. Like, and we know it's coming out, but that's one of the greatest things, I'll say with Striker is the innovation. Just it never stops. Just when you think, oh, it's this, what are they going to do now? And talking with you guys, I wear a lot of the summer apparel, and like this shirt here is a summer apparel one, and I wear this underneath the hoodie all the time because I love how it's almost breathable. So it gives you that little bit of vapor or a little bit of air barrier between your hoodies so you don't sweat as much. Even though it's a summertime shirt, it really kind of helps. And it's a slicker material. So when you pull on and off the hoodie, us bigger guys, we go to pull on the hoodie and it's like the sleeve gets stuck in your arm. Yeah. And you're your long sleeve up halfway up your arm. And so, yeah, it always kind of, like I said, it amazes me when I think, oh, okay, yep, Striker's got just this. And then you're like, nope, now here's another new thing. Okay. So it is definitely well worth every penny. And like I said, I'm thinking about getting another one just because it's like I got some blood stains and stuff on one of the legs because I darn old bluegill, I cut it on his gill plate, laid open my thumb all over the place, bleeding. And I was like, oh, now I got blood on my new Apex bibs. I'm like, well, at least now they look really broken. So
really broken. That's so funny. So we are almost coming to the end here. But Savannah has a really great question that is right in line with the things that you were talking about. So the key to layers to stay warm for newbies or those on a budget. And I have to just kind of agree with some of the things that I heard you saying. I know in the past, I have been a big fan of wearing like as many layers as possible because more is better and like probably comfortable or something like that. And this year I have really forced myself to try something different. And I really say forced because I was afraid and I was resistant to change any of my methods from the past. You know, when you have something that works, I know I've gone out before and super bitter cold, you know, if it worked, then it'll work now kind of thing. And so to do something different, urge you to pack those layers with you. So if you need to like run back to the car and put that on or whatever your old setup it is go for it. But I have truly found that the way to set myself up for success is that you're going to want, you know, your first layer is going to be something kind of wicking. So you're talking about even using some of that summer and sun gear. And the reason that is perfect is because if it's going to wick in the summer, it's going to wick in the winter. And then, you know, honestly, on top of that, you might want, you know, a warm layer like a sweatshirt or something. But I'm using that less as a warm layer and more as just a layering piece, because then on top of that, you have your bibs or your jacket. And so if you are getting too warm, then you can take off that jacket and have the sweatshirt, or, you know, you can vent your legs, you know, your bibs, open them up or something like that. But one of the things I would really say is do not over layer and do not feel like you're going to want like 3 pairs of pants or something like that, because anytime that you get a little bit warm and any moisture builds up, like even the tiniest amount of sweat that you don't even know that you're sweating, that is one of those times you will start to really feel cold.
Yeah, and
We got a couple things here in the comments. So, you know, there's mid layer for the base layer, the striker waypoint. That's something that doesn't get talked about enough. I have the waypoint pants and they're awesome. I'm waiting on the top, and I can't wait. Our buddy Spud from down southeast Wisconsin, fleece line ladies leggings. We can all thank him later. Well, I'm sure we will all be thanking you, Spud.
And that's what I wear, so you're right.
You know, I think I agree with all those guys. You know, I have my base, like my long johns like Tom, and I wear a pair of sweatpants and that's it on the bottom, and then I wear a summer shirt on the top with the matching long johns on over that, and then a hoodie. And that's what's comfortable for me. But like Emily said, you know, bring extra clothes with the first time you're trying to figure it out, and use the least amount of clothes that you feel comfortable using, and then go up from there. Because you can take them off, you can take it off later, but really you have to find the balance between keeping yourself cold after you're done setting up and keeping yourself warm after you're done setting up, you know, because you'll get cold when you're sitting there, and then staying cool enough while you are setting up, because you're moving a lot. And so you're going to have some give and take there. So there isn't one right answer. So set yourself up for the day you're going to have. But I really think that if you take the approach, like Emily said, and take a day and just layer throughout the day or de-layer throughout the day and find that point where you're comfortable, use that as a starting point every time, and you should be comfortable.
Yeah. And, you know, almost the same thing with socks. You know, at the show, remember, you know, a lot of people just throw on a sock. Get that base layer sock, that silk sock, whatever. They all call it different, but it's just to get that base layer sock before you put on a wool sock. And I've really found that I like a pack of wool. Seems to be like, to me, because I have my feet after 2 or 3 days, they stink. I mean, we all know that. Some people got stinkier feet than most. The striker socks I love, but that it seems like that pack of wool socks for me, my feet don't smell, but it also seems like they're just right. Like the striker ones were almost too warm and they just sweat terrible. So the pack of wool is a little bit thinner of a sock. And so I found, I'm like, okay, so now I got my happy medium here. You know, I always tell people the sock piece, and we had so many people ask, you know, what socks, what, you know, and oh, I bought, you know, this wool and this wool and this wool. I think a lot of times what I find or what I'm hearing is people buy too heavy a sock to put on, and they're like, oh, my feet are so warm. Well, but if they're so warm sitting, like just try going outside. Like literally just put on your boots and go sit outside and just see, not even with boots on, just put the socks on, go outside and just see how it feels. And it's like, if your feet still feel warm, just like being outside for a minute, think of what they're like in those boots. Like I think that's the biggest thing. You know, I get clients all the time. Oh, I got these electric socks and, you know, everything else. And then next, you know, my feet are freezing. Well, how much did your feet sweat before finally the battery runs out? And now that electric sock doesn't turn on. And now the sock is wet.
Yes. Yes. That is absolutely. So a few people in the comments suggesting additional sock options and all of that. So that is awesome. Yep. If you guys have other layers or things that you like, go ahead and post that in the comments, because I know that people are going to read that and love to learn from your experiences.
Absolutely.
Other than that, you know, we have talked about all kinds of things here tonight. So Tom, for people who might be still looking to get out on the trip with you, do you still have availability open, and how do people get a hold of you?
Yep. So I have a few, like 2 or 3 days a week, depending on different weeks here. It gets kind of spotty in between from now until the end of February, but I have a couple, probably I'd say, and the whole rest of the month, maybe 6 days that it's still left. And they can message me either through Facebook or just on TomTomsGuideservice.com, right on, go on the website. Facebook and website both have my phone number. And that goes if somebody's booking or somebody, you know, tuned in on this and still has a question for the area or whatever. A lot of people can just shoot me a message, whether it be on Facebook or through the website even, and go, hey, I forgot to ask this or whatever. I'm more than happy to, you know, help somebody out. So
awesome. Well, I mean, I guess with that, so many awesome things. So thanks for being here with us tonight.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And to everybody at home, it was a fabulous time chatting with you guys as well. Some really great things that you guys were able to, you know, put in and talk about and ask about and all of that. So it was awesome. So with that, thank you guys, everyone, for being here, and looking forward to seeing you on next week's edition of Hook, Line, and Striker.
Night, everybody.